Pele said it once about the Estadio Azteca in Mexico City, and the quote has been repeated so many times since that it's almost become a cliché. But clichés become clichés because they contain something true. He said, "There's just something special about the Azteca. You need to be inside it, to feel it, to understand. It's unique." He was right in 1970, when he lifted the World Cup trophy in that stadium for the last time. He was right in 1986, when Maradona turned the ground into a stage for two of the most famous moments in the history of the sport. And on the 11th of June 2026, 25 days from now, the Azteca will host the opening match of the biggest World Cup in history, Mexico versus South Africa, in front of 87,500 people who have been waiting for this moment for 40 years. That match will be loud in ways that defy description. The noise in that building when a Mexican team takes the field in a World Cup that Mexico is co-hosting for the third time in its history will be something that people who are not there will feel through their television screens. Not hear, feel. Because that is what the Azteca does. It is the only stadium that has hosted two World Cup finals. It is the only stadium in the history of the tournament that will now have hosted matches in 3 separate editions. Pele was there. Maradona was there, and on June 11th, the world comes back. And 5,000 miles north of Mexico City on the same morning, preparations are underway at BC Place in Vancouver, a retractable roof stadium framed by mountains and ocean, for a tournament that has given Canada something it has been waiting for since football first arrived on its shores, a men's World Cup on Canadian soil, for the first time, ever. Now, here is why those two facts matter enormously in the context of what is actually happening with the 2026 FIFA World Cup 3.5 weeks before it begins. This tournament has problems. Real, documented, verifiable problems. 80% of American host city hotels reporting bookings below a typical summer. Resale prices for 90% of matches falling. The U.S. opener still carrying unsold seats at over $1,000. Newsweek calling it a colossal dud. Climate scientists warning about dangerous heat conditions at a quarter of all matches. A qualified nation confirming participation only after an emergency meeting in Istanbul 2 days ago. Ticket prices 6 times higher than historical averages. 16,800 canceled international tickets. All of that is true, and all of it has been documented carefully over the past several months as the tournament has approached under a cloud of logistical, commercial, and fan experience concerns unlike anything the World Cup has faced in the modern era. But here is what that coverage has consistently underweighted: the part of this tournament that is not struggling, the part where the numbers are moving in the right direction, the part where hotel occupancy is surging, where international fans are booking in volumes that exceed expectations, where the atmosphere being built in the weeks before kickoff feels like what a World Cup is supposed to feel like. That part is in Mexico City, and in Vancouver, and in Toronto, and Guadalajara, and in Monterrey. Canada and Mexico, the two co-hosts that the coverage of this tournament has largely treated as supporting acts in an American story, are, according to the most recent data, the places where the 2026 FIFA World Cup is actually working, the places where the promise made in 2018, when the United bid was presented to the world as a celebration of football's global reach, is being kept. This is that story, in full, because it deserves to be told that way. Let's begin with Mexico City, because that's where the data is most striking and where the contrast with the American picture is most vivid. Mexico City hotel rates for the World Cup period have risen by 48.9% compared to the same period last year. Not 10%, not 25%, nearly 50%. In a context where American host cities are watching rates fall by up to 40% after FIFA canceled her room blocks, Mexico City's market is moving in the opposite direction with force. Demand is outpacing supply, which is exactly what a host city is supposed to experience in the weeks before a major tournament. The opening match is the reason. On June 11th, Mexico versus South Africa at the Azteca will be the most watched single sporting event since the last World Cup final. The Azteca has just completed a major renovation specifically for this tournament, a process that included repairing the roof, upgrading the facilities, and expanding seated capacity to 87,500. It reopened in March 2026 after months of construction. The result is a stadium that carries 60 years of football history in its structure while meeting the standards of a 2026 major event. And that match, Mexico versus South Africa, June 11th, 1 p.m. local time, is sold out. Has been sold out for months. The secondary market for Azteca tickets tells the story most clearly. While American venues watch resale prices fall 24% in a single month and group stage seats sell for $160, Azteca tickets are moving in the opposite direction. The demand from Mexican supporters, from Latin American fans across the continent, from international visitors specifically choosing Mexico City as their World Cup base, it is genuine, it is documented, and it is producing the kind of tourism economics that FIFA projected for the entire tournament. Beyond the Azteca, the pattern holds across all three Mexican venues. Estadio BBVA in Monterrey, 53,500 capacity, situated dramatically against the backdrop of the Sierra Madre mountain range, the home of CF Monterrey and a fiercely proud Sierra Madre football atmosphere in Latin America, is reporting strong booking activity. Estadio Akron in Guadalajara, modern, compact, purpose-built, the home of Chivas and the fiercely proud Tapatio football culture, has 4 matches scheduled, and demand that reflects a city that has been anticipating this moment for years. Mexico is hosting 13 matches in total. 13 separate opportunities for the football to feel like what it's supposed to feel like, played in atmospheres built by people who have loved this sport their entire lives, in cities that understand football not as an entertainment product, but as the central cultural expression of a community's identity. That is something you can't replicate by building a $5 billion stadium in Los Angeles. It exists, or it doesn't. In Mexico, it exists. There is something deeper in the Azteca's role in this tournament that the straightforward statistics don't fully capture. The stadium is, in a very specific sense, the spiritual headquarters of the World Cup's history. It has hosted Pelé at the peak of his powers in 1970. It has hosted what most football historians consider the greatest individual goal ever scored, Maradona's second against England in 1986, and the most controversial goal ever scored in the same match 60 seconds earlier. It has hosted the 1986 final, in which Argentina beat West Germany 3-2. It has seen more of the game's defining moments than any other building on Earth. And now, for the third time, the World Cup returns there to begin. FIFA's decision to give Mexico City the opening match of the tournament is not incidental. It is a statement. It says that the 2026 World Cup begins not in America's largest stadium or its most expensive venue. It begins where football's history lives. And the response from Mexican fans and international supporters choosing Mexico City as their base has validated that decision completely. Now, let's talk about Canada, because the Canadian story is different in texture from Mexico's, newer, quieter, built on enthusiasm rather than history, and in some ways it is even more remarkable. Canada is hosting the World Cup for the very first time, not for the second time, not returning after a long gap, the first time. The Men's World Cup has never been played on Canadian soil, and the significance of that fact for a country that has spent the past decade building a genuine football culture from the grassroots up is difficult to overstate. The data on Canadian tourism demand for this tournament is, by any measure, extraordinary. Hotel reservations in Canadian host cities are up 173% compared to the same period last year. Not a fraction of American cities' performance, 173% above the previous year, with game night premiums running more than 30% above normal rates. The province of British Columbia alone expects approximately 350,000 visitors to travel to Vancouver specifically for World Cup-related activities. Deloitte's analysis for Metro Vancouver estimates that hotels and short-term rentals together could host more than 1 million visitor nights linked to the tournament, with overall accommodation capacity in the wider region approaching 41,800 places per day. Read those numbers again against the American backdrop. New York hotels expecting to miss $100 million in anticipated revenue. Vancouver expecting 1 million visitor nights. The contrast is not subtle. British Columbia's hotel market, unlike several American cities, has actually absorbed FIFA's cancellation of room blocks without significant price collapse. When FIFA released approximately 15,000 room nights back to the general market in Vancouver, the same action that caused 40% price drops in American cities, the BC Hotel Association reported that the market absorbed the supply without significant disruption because underlying demand was already strong enough to fill the gap. That is what a healthy tourism market looks like heading into a major event. What explains the difference? Several things, and they're worth going through carefully because they tell you something important about why Canada has worked where America has struggled. The first is the visa question. Canada's entry process for international visitors is straightforward by the standards of the current tournament environment. The electronic travel authorization, available online, completed in minutes for citizens of visa-exempt countries, costing $7 Canadian, covers the vast majority of international football fans. For countries requiring a formal visa, Canada has not introduced financial bond requirements or unpredictable processing conditions. The clarity of Canada's entry process has made it the rational choice for fans from dozens of countries who are comparing the complexity of American entry requirements with the simplicity of arriving in Toronto or Vancouver. The second is what Canada's cities actually are. Toronto is, by most measures, the most culturally diverse city on Earth. More than 50% of its residents were born outside Canada. When the World Cup comes to Toronto, when Canada plays Bosnia and Herzegovina on June 12th at BMO Field in the first men's World Cup match ever staged in Canada, the crowd inside that stadium and the streets around it will contain supporters from virtually every nation participating in the tournament. Not because they flew from their home countries to Toronto, because they already live there. Toronto doesn't need to attract the world for the World Cup. The world is already there. Vancouver offers something different but equally compelling. BC Place sits in the heart of downtown Vancouver, a retractable roof stadium with a mountain and ocean backdrop that no other tournament venue can match aesthetically. Vancouver's West Coast energy and its proximity to the Pacific Rim has made it the natural entry point for fans from Japan, South Korea, Australia, and across Southeast Asia, following their national teams. The tournament's geographic clustering, the Western Pod connecting Vancouver with Seattle, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, means that fans arriving in Vancouver can reasonably attend multiple matches without crossing continents. That practical advantage, combined with Canada's welcoming entry process, has driven the booking numbers to levels that outperform almost every American host city. And then there is the new phenomenon that Mexico specifically has produced, one that no previous World Cup has generated quite like this: the football digital nomad. In the weeks since the squad announcements began and the tournament's proximity became real, a specific category of international fan has been making a particular kind of booking in Mexico City, Guadalajara, and Monterrey. Not a hotel room for 3 nights, a furnished apartment or a serviced residence for 3 weeks. Fans who work remotely, whose jobs can be done from a laptop anywhere with a reliable internet connection, are not coming to Mexico for a match and leaving. They're coming for the season. According to local travel data, there has been a significant spike in long-term rental bookings across all 3 host cities starting months before the opening whistle on June 11th. These are fans from Europe and South America primarily, making the calculation that if you're going to spend thousands on flights and football, you might as well spend those weeks in a city with the best street food in the world, one of the most vibrant cultural scenes on the continent, and the football atmosphere that justifies every single hour of the journey.
The economic impact of this pattern is different from traditional World Cup tourism and more sustainable. Rather than a burst of hotel revenue over a single match day followed by rapid departure, the digital nomad fan spends weeks patronizing local restaurants, co-working spaces, neighborhood markets, and the kind of local economy that standard tourism infrastructure often misses entirely. For Mexico City's Polanco, Roma, and Condesa neighborhoods, already among the most internationally desirable districts in Latin America, the World Cup is not a disruption to ordinary life, but an amplification of the city's existing cultural momentum. Now, Here is the question that the contrast between Canada and Mexico on one side and America on the other naturally raises. Is this tournament, in tourism terms, actually three separate events happening simultaneously under the same banner? The evidence suggests something close to that. Mexico's hotel market is rising sharply. Canada's bookings are up 173%. American cities are describing the tournament as a non-event. The international fans who were deterred by visa complexity, ticket prices, or safety concerns from traveling to the United States are, in many documented cases, choosing Canada or Mexico instead, or following their teams to the American leg of the tournament only when match schedules require it. The cluster system that FIFA introduced specifically to manage the logistics of a three-nation tournament has, in practice, also created distinct tourism ecosystems. The Western Cluster, Vancouver, Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, connects Canada's Pacific Gateway to American West Coast cities. The Central Cluster, Kansas City, Dallas, Houston, sits in the American heartland, with Mexico City accessible for fans willing to cross the border. The Eastern Cluster, Toronto, Boston, New York, Miami, connects Canada's cultural capital to the American East Coast corridor. For fans navigating the tournament, this means Toronto functions as a practical base for the Eastern Pod. Vancouver functions as the Pacific Gateway that requires no U.S. entry documentation at all for its own matches. And Mexico City functions as what it has always been in football terms, the most emotionally significant venue in the Western Hemisphere, in a country where the sport is not entertainment, but identity. Think about what this means for the atmospheric experience of the tournament as a whole. The matches at the Azteca will produce the loudest, most passionate, most historically resonant crowds of any venue in the tournament. The Estadio Azteca, where the Ola, the Mexican wave, was invented in the stands of its own terraces and spread to every stadium in the world, will generate noise that carries the weight of 60 years of World Cup memory. When Mexico's players walk out onto that pitch on June the 11th and 87,500 people make their sound, it will be one of the defining moments of the 2026 tournament before a single pass is played. Canada's BMO Field on June the 12th, smaller, more intimate, the smallest venue in the tournament at 45,000, will produce something different. The noise of a nation playing its first ever men's World Cup match on home soil. Alphonso Davies, Jonathan David, the players who took Canada to Qatar in 2022 and gave a nation permission to believe in its football, playing now in front of their own people. That emotional context is irreplaceable. It cannot be manufactured in SoFi Stadium or AT&T Stadium, regardless of how much those buildings cost or how impressive their video screens are. The fan zone experience in both countries reinforces the pattern. Vancouver's English Bay fan zone, outdoors, surrounded by mountains, the Pacific in the background, has already generated enormous interest from both domestic and international visitors who want the World Cup experience without the complexity of ticket procurement. Toronto's waterfront fan zone is expected to draw fans from across the continent's football diaspora communities. Mexico City's public fan zones, in the shadow of historic architecture and surrounded by the best food in the hemisphere, will function as the social heart of the tournament for fans who cannot get into the Azteca but want to be in the city when the world watches. For FIFA, the data from Canada and Mexico should be instructive in ways that go beyond this tournament. The pattern is clear. When a World Cup host creates genuine accessibility, affordable entry processes, welcoming logistics, cultural depth that extends beyond the stadium, fans respond in the numbers that the projections always assumed they would. The fans are not absent because they don't want to attend a World Cup. They're absent in American cities specifically because specific barriers have discouraged them. Canada and Mexico remove those barriers, either by design or by circumstance. Canada's simple visa process, Toronto's organic multicultural football community, Vancouver's natural geographic appeal to Pacific Rim supporters, none of these were created specifically for 2026. They are simply what those places are. And what those places are turns out to be exactly what a World Cup needs. Mexico's football passion, the roar that will greet the opening match on June the 11th, the atmosphere in the cantinas of Guadalajara on match nights, the feeling in the streets of Monterrey when the Estadio BBVA fills with noise against the mountain backdrop, was not produced by a commercial strategy. It was produced by 60 years of a country caring about this sport more than almost anything else. What does all of this mean for the 2026 World Cup's legacy when the final whistle blows in New Jersey on the 19th of July? It means the tournament will be remembered as two things simultaneously: as a commercial exercise that overreached in America and discovered the limits of dynamic pricing and corporate hospitality as a replacement for genuine fan culture, and as a football event that in Mexico City and Vancouver and Toronto and Guadalajara, it delivered something that the sport's history will recognize as authentic. The Azteca on June the 11th will be one of those moments, the kind that reminds people who have been watching football for 30 years why the World Cup matters, in ways that no other tournament can replicate. A building full of people who have waited 40 years for this, making a sound that Pelé said you need to be inside to understand. And in Toronto on June the 12th, something quieter but equally significant will happen. Canada's first Men's World Cup on home soil. Players who grew up watching this tournament on television, representing a country that is only now understanding what it means to be a football nation, playing in front of a city that already contains the world in its population. That is not a tournament that is falling apart. That is a tournament that is, in its Canadian and Mexican chapters, doing exactly what it was always supposed to do. Whether the American chapter catches up, whether the late rush that hospitality economists are cautiously predicting materializes, whether the football itself generates the energy that fills those mid-tier seats in Dallas and Kansas City, only the next 25 days will tell. But the story of the 2026 World Cup is not entirely a story of disappointment. It is a story of contrast, of a tournament that worked differently in different places. And in the places where it worked, in Mexico City, in Vancouver, in Toronto, and Guadalajara, it worked because football was allowed to be what it has always been, a game that belongs to the people who love it. And the people who love it showed up. What do you think? Is Canada and Mexico's strong performance enough to save the overall reputation of this tournament? And when you think about the 2026 World Cup's legacy, which venue do you think will produce the most memorable moment? Leave it in the comments. I read everything. If this kind of football conversation is worth your time, honest, grounded, built on what the numbers and the history actually show, a like and a subscribe means a great deal. See you in the next one. 25 days. The Azteca is ready. Canada is ready. Whatever else surrounds this tournament, the football is coming, and it will start in the best possible place.